Oh, good afternoon, everybody, and you're very welcome today. My name is Joanne Drum, and I'm with the Education Department of the National Gallery of Ireland. Today, we'll be hearing about our new exhibition, Ludovico Mazzolino's The Crossing of the Red Sea. Today, we're going to hear from the three curators of the exhibition, Dr. Aoife Brady, Maria Canavan, and Dr. Natalia Macro. So what I just wanted to go through with you first was a little bit of housekeeping. This is a Zoom webinar. We can't hear you and we can't see you. So please feel free to have a cup of tea or take some notes or whatever it is you'd like to do while we're speaking. It won't disturb us at all. Our curators are really happy to take your questions, and if you have any questions for them, please pop them in the Q&A box. You'll see that at the bottom of your screen there. If they're technical questions that I can help with, just pop them in there and I'll answer during the presentation. Otherwise, I will come up at the end and I will relay them to our curators. I wanted to let you know as well that Aoife Brady is currently on maternity leave, but has pre-recorded her segment. So I'll be playing that bit first, and then Maria, who's here, will follow up, and then Natalia after that. So it is an absolutely beautiful exhibition. I got to pop in the other day and have a look. It's a really gorgeous one-room show, which really delves into not only the artwork, but also the really fascinating conservation process. It's running in the Hugh Lane room until the 6th of July, so plenty of time to get in there, and we'd love to see you. What I'm going to do now, if it works, is turn off my video and share Aoife's video, which is here. So if you just bear with me one moment, I will make sure that it works. And thank you for your patience. Right, fingers crossed. Share sound. That's it there. Right. That's Aoife about to start. So I'm going to disappear now and turn off my camera. And as I said, if you have any questions, just pop them in there for me. Thank you so much.
My name's Aoife Brady, and I'm the gallery's curator of Italian and Spanish art, and one of the curators of this In Focus exhibition dedicated to a conservation and research project on Ludovico Mazzolino's The Crossing of the Red Sea, which you can see here at the National Gallery of Ireland, free of charge, in the upper Bight wing from the 15th of February until the 6th of July of 2025. This exhibition will celebrate the conservation and redisplay of a painting that's been in the gallery's holdings since 1914, but has not been on its walls in recent memory. Painted in the early decades of the 16th century by a prominent Italian Renaissance artist, the panel is recognized internationally as one of Mazzolino's most ambitious works, but is little known to our visiting public. Since the 1930s, it's been recorded as in an unstable condition, with very fine cracking and delamination of the paint layer evident throughout. Previous conservation efforts which were carried out in the 1970s, specifically with a view to consolidating the paint layer, were unfortunately largely unsuccessful. But in 2023, the gallery was awarded a grant from the TEFAF Museum Restoration Fund, that's the European Fine Art Fair's Museum Restoration Fund, enabling us to embark on an extensive conservation and research project to address these structural issues more definitively and to return the painting to long-term public display for the first time in many years. It's been a real pleasure to work alongside my colleagues in the Conservation Department, Maria Canavan, who's our paintings conservator, and Natalia Macro, a research scientist, on this exciting project to bring this important painting back on view. So, who was Ludovico Mazzolino? Our knowledge of Mazzolino's early life is quite limited, but he probably began his studies in his native Ferrara in northern Italy with his father Giovanni, and then with leading Ferrarese artist Ercole di Roberti. Then, after Roberti's death in 1496, Mazzolino is believed to have moved to Bologna, where he completed his training in the workshop of Lorenzo Costa. Costa was a prominent painter who, like Mazzolino, was from Ferrara, but he worked in Bologna before succeeding Andrea Mantegna as the principal painter at the Gonzaga court in Mantua. Our exhibition in Dublin will include a work on panel by Costa, the Holy Family, from our own permanent collection. And this will illustrate the traditions from which Mazzolino as a young artist was drawing and the manner in which he went on to develop his own highly personal, unique style and technique. The young Mazzolino's talent seems to have been apparent from a very early stage of his career, since by the turn of the 16th century, he had already returned to Ferrara and was recognized as the city's leading painter. Surviving documents reveal that as early as 1504, Mazzolino was receiving important public commissions from Duke Ercole I d'Este, one of the most important patrons of the arts in the late 15th and early 16th centuries. At this time, the court of Ferrara, who were led by the Este family, was recognized as one of the most renowned and opulent centers for architecture, music, literature, and visual arts in Renaissance Italy. When Alfonso I d'Este came to power following the death of Ercole in 1505, Mazzolino was employed to complete decorations on the Castello Estense, including the important private rooms of the Duke's wife, Lucrezia Borgia. Mazzolino went on to have a very successful and prolific career, painting for both members of the court and private patrons alike. And just like his contemporary Ortolano, sadly, Mazzolino died sometime during the third decade of the 16th century, a victim of the plague that at that time was rife in Ferrara. Over the course of his career, Mazzolino typically produced small-scale devotional works, like the one I was just showing you from the Metropolitan Museum of Art. But he later gained the confidence to execute more demanding compositions. As one of only 3 surviving large-scale compositions that are securely attributed to Mazzolino today, the National Gallery of Ireland's panel is recognised as a really rare masterpiece that connects 2 other key paintings from the artist's mature career. That is the Massacre of the Innocents that I show you here on the left from Rome's Galleria Doria Pamphili, and on the right, the Dispute in the Temple from Berlin's Gemälde Gallery. The Roman painting, believed to have been created around the same time as the crossing of the Red Sea, illustrates a similarly crowded, multicolored composition with figures on an almost identical scale. The Berlin panel, on the other hand, sees quite a large increase in dimensions, featuring the same kind of composition, but with figures zoomed in on a larger scale. Signed in Hebrew and dated 1521 on a vase that appears in the bottom right, around here. The Dublin panel, the crossing of the Red Sea, was created at the height of Mazzolino's career and is a true illustration of the artist's experimental spirit. Illustrating the Old Testament story which describes Moses leading the Israelites out of Egypt, Mazzolino depicts the moment in which, having parted the Red Sea to bring his people to safety, Moses closes the waters on the pursuing Egyptian army. The artist abandons the normal rules of perspective entirely and captures his chaotic scene from above, rendering each tiny figure in exceptional detail as they frantically scramble to escape drowning. In the center of the scene, the Egyptian commander, dressed in costume decorated with meticulously applied gold, rises from his chariot in a desperate attempt to save himself. On the right, in stark contrast, Moses stands calmly on the shore holding a staff with which he's commanding the waves, surrounded by grateful figures of the Israelites. With his hair blowing in the wind, God emerges from a cloud above them, alongside the punitive Archangel Michael, who appears on horseback. In composing complex compositions such as this one, it seems that Mazzolino drew upon a repertoire of human and animal figures established already by his studio and kept in drawings, prints, and model books of ancient reliefs and sculptures. We can often recognize repetition in the faces and poses of the figures in his work, supporting the notion that he and his assistants were consulting a pattern book as they created these kinds of compositions. We can in fact identify some of the same faces in the Dublin panel that we see in Berlin's, for example. So somewhat like modern animators, Mazzolino's studio is known to have worked like this for decades, which explains why his paintings sometimes look like assemblies of a set of motifs and figures, cut and pasted together like a large collage. The Dublin panel is a really excellent and rare example of a complex and ambitious composition demonstrating Mazzolino's ability to assimilate different styles. His work has been described as a melting pot of Italian painting during the first decades of the 16th century, in part thanks to his well-placed location. Ferrara was, of course, and is surrounded by and within easy journeying distance of so many other artistically and culturally vibrant cities, such as Bologna, Venice, Mantua, and Padua. In the crossing of the Red Sea, we can identify many local influences from Ferrarese and Bolognese artists like Dosso Dossi. This is a nice example of a work from the National Gallery of Art in Washington, where the artist employs a similar palette and includes a comparable landscape in the background. Then we see Amico Aspertini. In this Adoration of the Magi from the Uffizi collection, the artist illustrates a crowd of people in a landscape with expressions and poses that are sort of reminiscent of Mazzolino's characters. Then we see Garofalo, who in his Adoration of the Magi, in his Adoration of the Magi, forgive me, we see Ortolano in his Adoration of the Magi dresses his characters in orientalizing costume that speaks to that worn by the Egyptians in Mazzolino's Crossing of the Red Sea. And then we have Garofalo, who in this work includes a tightly packed group of figures set against a landscape, again, much like Mazzolino's composition. More interesting, maybe, is the apparent influence from beyond the Alps, of artists from beyond the Alps, such as Lucas Cranach the Elder and Albert Dürer, both well known for strange and crowded compositions that were richly coloured and meticulously painted, featuring a host of characters almost grotesque and cartoonish in their treatment, like those seen in Dublin's Crossing of the Red Sea. Northern European prints were readily available in Italy during Mazzolino's lifetime, and he likely had them in his studio and consulted them regularly. But Dürer is also believed to have visited Ferrara on at least one occasion during Mazzolino's time there. One of Mazzolino's main sources of inspiration for the battle scenes, such as the one in the Crossing of the Red Sea, were sarcophagi that were decorated with Amazonomachy reliefs, portraying mythical battles between the ancient Greeks and Amazons, who were a nation of all-female warriors. Towards the second decade of the 16th century, Mazzolino is thought to have travelled to Rome, as various direct quotations from these kinds of ancient marble reliefs seem to testify. These new influences are what led him to conceive the kinds of chaotic masterpieces that are illustrated by the Crossing of the Red Sea and the Galleria Doria Pamphili's Massacre of the Innocents, which I showed you a little earlier. Our exhibition here in Dublin includes a second work by Mazzolino, the tribute money from the collection of Christ Church Picture Gallery in the University of Oxford. Close in date, but much smaller in size. So this one is 30 by 20.5 centimeters versus Crossing of the Red Sea's 125 by 157 centimeters. So the Christ Church painting illustrates the same crowded composition and meticulous technique that's evident in the National Gallery of Ireland's work, but on a scale that's much more typical of Mazzolino's usual output. He usually worked on this kind of small scale. This canvas depicts a story from the Gospel of Matthew in which a Roman tax collector demands money from Christ and the 12 apostles who don't have the money to pay. And so Jesus directs Peter to find a coin in the mouth of a fish to cover the cost. In both the Dublin and Christchurch paintings, Mazzolino includes comparable fantastical landscapes and a range of expressive figures demonstrating again his studio's regular use of pattern books. The juxtaposition of this smaller painting with the NGI's panel we hope will serve to further emphasise the unusual nature of the sizable Dublin work and enables us to explore potential reasons for the inherent instability of Mazzolino's large-scale compositions. So the condition issues that we find in his large-scale works don't seem to affect his smaller compositions in quite the same way. So for more about the painting's condition and the conservation research and treatment, I'm now going to hand you over with pleasure to my colleague, Maria Canavan.
Hi there, everyone. If you just bear with me now for a moment, I'm going to try to share my screen with you. Okay, so thanks very much, Sharifa, for that. I'm going to take up the topic from here and talk a little bit about the conservation project that was involved to bring this exhibition to bear before passing on to Natalia, who's going to tell you a little bit more about the scientific analysis and round things up. So as Aoife mentioned, this project was a perfect example of how a focused collaborative effort between curators, scientists and conservators can build a really strong understanding of a work of art in its historical context. So it's really, really fulfilling for us to be able to celebrate that with this In Focus exhibition. And thanks to the grant that we received from TAFE, we were able to really enrich our understanding of this artist by visiting those two other paintings that Aoife referred to in her talk, the Massacre of the Innocents in Rome and the Disputed Temple in the Gemälde Gallery in Berlin. And these two images here are from our trip there, where we were able to consult with colleagues there about that painting and the condition of it. We just found remarkable similarities in the construction and the production of those two other paintings and similar conservation problems too. So we're not able normally to conduct this kind of level of in-depth comparative research. So I must say it was hugely impactful to the project outcomes and to the work we do in conservation science as well. So it enabled a special opportunity for us to showcase that in our exhibition here. So we heard from Aoife about Mazzolino's significance and his workshop practices, and now I'm going to take you on a deep dive into the materials of this painting, looking at the conservation issues, how it was made, the history behind it, and the conservation process recently. So the painting is amongst some of the largest paintings on wooden panel that we have in our collection. And for its age, the panel support is one of the most intact. Most works on wooden panel from this kind of period would have been cut down or reinforced over time, but this one remains largely as Mazzolino intended. He used a poplar wood support for this painting, joining three hand-sawn horizontal planks together to make his large working surface. And you can see here on the left, here's the pattern of the planks. There's a smaller plank at the top and then two larger planks in the middle and the bottom. To help stabilize the joints, then he used these butterfly-shaped dowels or keys that are inlaid to the front and the back of the panel along the joints. This panel making process is quite sophisticated, so it indicates the sort of level of work that went into and the craft that went into creating this panel support. It's also a sort of a signature for this workshop. As you can see here up in the upper right, it's a snap from the painting in Berlin, showing the same kind of construction and the same kind of butterfly joint is used there in that panel, and we find the same thing in the panel in Rome. So understanding this wooden support is really key to understanding the conservation challenges for this painting. You can see here I put in the lower right an indication of how different cuts of wood behave differently when the wood moisture content changes. So radial planks that are cut at a 90-degree angle to the grain will generally be more dimensionally stable, whereas tangential planks that are cut all the way across the piece of wood, especially where they include some of the pith in the center of the tree, tend to shrink and swell much more dramatically when the humidity changes, leading to twisted or warped planks. Apologies, there's a telephone ringing in the room. Our Mazzolino panel is comprised of 3 planks, each of which is cut slightly differently. Therefore, they react differently in different changing conditions of humidity. This creates competing tensions, which are then focused along these joints and at these butterfly keys, leading to an eventual loosening and lifting of the paint. So on top of this wooden support, he then added a thin layer of gesso priming, and then he applied his oils on top of this. Unfortunately, paint layers respond differently to changing humidity too. They tolerate a certain amount of strain from a moving support underneath until they break, leading to the craquelure that you will see on many aged paintings. So here are some images just to illustrate the challenge we were faced with in dealing with this conundrum of differently reacting material layers on Mazzolino. On the left, you can see an area in the sea on the lower edge of the painting where the age cracks in the painting layer are lifted and tented due to the ingrained shrinkage in the support along the grain. This was typical of what we found throughout the painting, and restorers' treatments over the years had helped to keep the paint on the surface. But you can see there in the central image here that this led to a buildup of layers, which actually were, holding some of the cracks open because these layers of various adhesives and varnishes had really been ingrained into the cracks of the painting, along with dirt and grime and soiling for many years. On the right, you can see a detail here of the UV imaging that shows the varnish on the painting. The natural resin coatings in the varnish can be seen with a milky green color. So it just shows how thick and uneven the coatings across the surface of the painting were. So the action of any kind of adhesive material over these layers is really hampered by that physical block of the varnish and the older glue layers. So that was another thing for us to contend with in the treatment of the painting. Since its acquisition in 1914, the painting's condition has been a persistent concern, as Aoife mentioned. It was first treated in 1933 and again then in the 70s, where it remained in the conservation studio over the course of 5 whole years. This 1971 image on the right shows extensive lifting and flaking. While the consolidation was carried out at the time, its effects were short-lived. And when I assessed the painting then in 2010, I placed it in the high-risk category due to further cleavage and lifting that I noted in the paint layer. By 2012, the situation had worsened and movement of the painting was restricted to prevent damage. But the limited public access reinforced the need for some long-term solution. So luckily in 2024, we were able to commence in earnest, and we began with a diagnostic process with a suite of technical imaging using ultraviolet and infrared light. So you can see here on the left is the ultraviolet image and infrared on the right. Restoration and art materials such as varnishes and glues each kind of have a fingerprint fluorescence color in UV light. And we use this with our UV reflectography to show where the extent of the overpaint, the varnishes or old damages might be on the surface of a painting. Infrared imaging there on the right allows us, if you will, to see beneath the paint layer. Carbon-based drawing materials that usually are invisible to the naked eye because they're covered by paint are revealed using this method. So in this case, the workings of Mazzolino's chaotic composition can be seen. So I just want to spend a little time looking at these. everywhere you look in the infrared image, you see something new, and we printed the image to scale in the exhibition room. So this will allow visitors to compare it like for like right beside the real painting. I'll just quickly point out a couple of my favorite parts here. Hidden incomplete figures are scattered all over the composition, as though Mazzolino was adding or removing them to try and achieve some compositional balance, rather than working to some prescribed plan. So above here, you can see a very loosely sketched opposing figure on the upper fringes of the Egyptian cohort. This fellow was only quickly drawn in to be just as quickly removed. And below, you can see a different level of finish. You can see this character that's just there in the fringes of the sea. He was more fully finished in paint before Mazzolino covered him up. So the UV image on the lower right there, you can see it picks up the hidden pigment that is below the surface, showing that Mazzolino had actually painted that figure before painting him out. So all those changes are really interesting and fun to try to spot. And it's the opportunity to see Mazzolino's confident and masterful gestural drawings in this infrared that really stands out. Look for a moment at Moses' arm here, where the artist demonstrated his anatomical understanding and conveys the sense of dynamism that's difficult to find when you look at the comparative infrared image of Costa's Holy Family, which is also on display in the exhibition space. This really gives you an appreciation of the development between the teacher and the student, and how Mazzolino really was being quite playful in his underdrawing when you compare it to the more formal Costa underdrawing. So those diagnostic images, along with scientific analysis that Natalia will explain shortly, all contributed to the treatment plan for the painting. The course of treatment was established after a long period of testing and involved five main stages. So we had the initial stabilization to ensure the paint layer would withstand the frictions of the treatment. A surface cleaning to remove earlier restoration materials that were inhibiting the deep penetration of the adhesive. As I mentioned before, there was quite a bulk of restoration materials on the surface before you would reach the paint. The third was reduction of the varnish layers that were there and retouchings that were applied in the 1970s and the 1930s, just to allow that access into the paint crack apertures. Then the application of natural adhesives directly into the crack apertures and gentle heat treatments to relax the lifting paint layers. And that all was rounded up then once the painting was stabilized, with an application of a new protective and reversible varnish layer and retouchings in order to just make the painting as aesthetically close to what Mazzolino intended in the first place. Comparing the before and after images here, there's really only a subtle change in the color and the saturation of the painting overall. The varnish from the 1970s had not really degraded or discolored very much at all. But the fact that it was blocking this penetration of new adhesive into the cracks in the paint layer meant that, something needed to be done in order to stabilize those cracks. So all that was left to do after cleaning was to retouch the areas of historic loss around the joints and the butterfly keys, and to address areas where the original paint had been abraded or damaged by historic solvent damage. So here's a good example of my approach for that type of retouching. The oranges in particular in the painting have been affected by degradation and by solvent damage, leading to increased transparency and in some areas almost total abrasion, where you can see the ground layer beneath the naked eye. Mazzolino's underdrawings also happen to be more visible in these areas, and in that respect, they tell us a lot about how the painting was made. So the challenge with retouching is to compensate for that loss of paint, reinstating the intended final forms and colors, while also allowing some level of transparency to view the layers below and have that remain perceptible. So here's an example of an area where some retouching was done in the hope to achieve that kind of finish. Once I finished all that, I turned my hand to the arguably more boring but much more impactful part of the conservation process, and that's a part known as preventive conservation. I adapted Mazzolino's frame to receive a customized back frame that would house an enclosure known as a microclimate. This is basically a hermetically sealed packet which forms an oxygen barrier around the painting. And it looks from the back a little bit like a giant sandwich bag. This type of enclosure is proven to drastically reduce the impact of changing humidity. So basically, it slows down the degradation of the painting by preventing the swelling and shrinking of the wooden support with humidity changes. A device that monitors the temperature and humidity is fitted inside the enclosure, so we can carefully monitor how Mazzolino reacts over time. The intention of this framing is to ensure that the results of this conservation treatment are long-lasting and allow us to safely display, move and store the painting within the gallery. And, you know, it's my hope with this treatment and this approach that, you know, for many years to come, we won't really need to intervene with Mazzolino again. And hopefully we're not going to have this continuous cycle of instability and treatment going on. So, so with that in mind, I'm going to wrap up there, and I want to hand over to Natalia, who will let us know all about the wonderful work of the Science Lab in the gallery and how it has really impacted this project on Mazzolino.
Thanks so much, Maria. If you just give me a second, I'll try and share my screen too. Yes. Here we go. I hope you can see my screen. So thanks so much, Maria, and thank you, Joanne, for coordinating this. So my name is Natalia Macro, and I am the research scientist at the National Gallery of Ireland. I started 2 years ago, and my main task was to set up the analytical lab inside the gallery, which means having a series of analytical equipment that can perform analysis on our collection and collaborate with external institutions for similar purposes. So what is the point of scientific analysis in conservation? This is a very, it's a very complex topic, of course, but mostly this is about deepening our understanding in the materials and the techniques used in our collection. This can, as Maria mentioned, inform conservation treatments and preventative strategies, which are very important for the protection of our collection, but also analytical study can help us monitoring deterioration and know more about environmental risks such as sudden raise in humidity or temperature or exposition to UV light, for instance, which are very detrimental to paintings, for instance. It can also be a support in authenticating artworks, especially working in close collaboration with conservators and curatorial, and it can enhance our knowledge about the object and the artist, like in this case. In this picture, you can see that Maria is holding a scalpel and pointing at a tiny, tiny fraction of material that we had to sample from this amazing panel from Ludovico Mazzolino. Now, the scientific analysis is a true bridge between curatorial conservation and our general understanding of our collection. So these are some of the pieces of equipment that we have at the moment in the gallery, and I'll tell you more about each of them, hoping this is an interesting topic. So now on the left, you can see this is an FTIR microscope. It's a Fourier transformed infrared microscope that will shine a particular kind of light onto our sample and collect a certain kind of information. I'll show you a bit more in detail about this FTIR microscope in a few slides. The one on the right is a Raman microscope that has a similar application, but let's say a different kind of physical phenomenon. And the one on the bottom is a scanning electron microscope, which is actually incredibly tiny for being such a complex piece of equipment. And then aside from those, we have a common optical microscope, which uses visible light, a portable digital microscope. I think you saw one image took with us that was really giving you a bit of information on the cracking and on the surface of the panel. And then we have a portable X-ray fluorescence spectrometer, which is this one. That you can see in this image. So when we run analysis on our collection, we have two different sets of tools we can use. One is non-invasive, meaning that the kind of techniques that do not need to alter or damage our artworks, our painting. So we don't need to take a sample, and we can, in theory, perform this kind of analysis as much as we need. These kind of techniques are ideal for fragile artworks like the Mazzolino panel and very precious ones, or they're just ideal when it's not possible for us to take a sample or as a preliminary survey. And other techniques are invasive, which means that they require us to take a very, very tiny sample, but they generally provide more detailed and targeted information. So we generally have to take a few samples, but we try to limit the sampling as much as possible and be mindful, of course, of the object condition and the kind of techniques that we can use in-house. Now, why is it so important to have a lab in-house? Before I joined the gallery, my colleagues, of course, were performing analysis outside in collaboration with other institutions. That's always a possibility, but having a lab in-house inside the gallery really fosters a close collaboration between us in conservation and, for instance, our curatorial colleagues like IFA. The first step of our survey was to run X-ray fluorescence on the painting. Now, this kind of equipment is defined non-invasive, so we don't need to take a sample, and it looks like this kind of like tiny space gun. It's completely non-invasive, and it's an elemental analysis techniques, which means that it gives us information on the elements in the painting. It emits a very low dose of ionizing radiation, so we need to be mindful of the health and safety aspect while using it, but it's very useful for identifying pigments, and I'll show you a bit more in detail what that means. Now, these are all the points we analyze on the painting, and as you can see, our survey was quite extensive. We analyzed 35 points corresponding to 35 different areas to compare original areas, areas that were retouched in the past, and area of losses, so we can get a bit of information on the elemental composition of the panel. And this is some of the information we could gather. You don't have to read this. I know it's very dense, but just to show you that there is so much we can achieve just using this tiny piece of equipment. So as you can see, these are all the elements: copper, lead, iron, mercury, tin, silicon, and calcium and others. And all these elements point at a very complex palette used by Ludovico Mazzolino. These are some of the pigments that Mazzolino used in his panel. The red pigment vermilion was found extensively used in all the red and the brown shades. Ultramarine is very expensive blue pigment. Azurite is a bit less expensive and a slightly different shade of blue. And extensive use of earth pigments that contain a lot of iron, but also orpiment, which is particularly challenging from a conservation perspective and contains arsenic, and lead white, so a pigment containing lead, as the name will suggest, was found extensively in all the painting, and was also used in an imprimitura layer, which is a thin ground layer. Shell gold was also found, so we found gold through this kind of analysis. Then we had to take a few small samples, and we analyzed them using our microscopy, our FTIR, our Raman, and our SEM. The FTIR, it's an incredibly powerful technique. This is a detail of a cross-section, so a tiny slice of the painting that includes all the layer. So we have the ground layer on the bottom, which is this thick off-white layer, then this imprimitura, which is the thinner off-white layer, a bit more creamy-like. Brown and a blue, and then a top layer, which is white. So we could analyze all these different layers using the techniques we have at the gallery. And for instance, in this example, we use this FTIR to take a tiny, tiny, tiny amount of material from the ground layer and and investigate the composition. Now, FTIR is not an elemental technique. It's a molecular technique, which means that it tells us the way the elements are combined together in molecules. And the result we get is this kind of graph here that is called an FTIR spectrum. And each element in the composition, each ingredient that we use by Mazzolino has a specific and special fingerprint, a special molecular fingerprint. So in this graph here, in this spectrum, you see this is gypsum, which is calcium sulfate that was extensively used by Mazzolino in the preparatory layer. So the layer that is applied on top of the wood panel to prepare it for the other paint layers. And then we could perform Raman spectroscopy directly on these cross sections. This is another detail. And this is such a powerful technique because we can shine this special light directly onto single particles of pigment and get molecular information on those. In this case, for instance, we could shine a light on this tiny, tiny red particle that it's invisible at the naked eye, and we could get confirmation that he used the pigment vermilion, which is this mercury sulfide, which you can also see in the exhibition in the case. And then finally, this is our latest acquisition. It's a scanning electron microscope coupled with energy dispersive X-ray spectroscopy. It's a bit mouthful. We call it SEM. This is a high-resolution microscope that uses electrons instead of visible light, but it works exactly like a microscope. So we'll shine a light and collect information once again. And but in this case, we use this electron beam, which is why the image is in black and white. And using a special kind of detector, the image we get actually already gives us information on the elements, because the image is in black and white, as you can see on the bottom. But the higher the atomic weight of the element, so the heavier the element we're looking at is, the more white will appear in the SEM image. So for instance, this particle here that is highlighted by the red arrow is lead white. So lead is a very heavy element. So we already see it in a different color in comparison with the visible light image. So the combination of all these techniques together gave us a lot of information on the materials that Mazzolino used and highlighted how important this painting is, aside from, of course, the, let's say, visual we can get just looking at it. Mazzolino invested a lot of time and probably a lot of money in using very special and very expensive pigments and a large variety of expensive pigments. So all these techniques together really gave us a very detailed idea of this incredible panel. So thank you so much for your attention, and please let us know if you have any question about this exhibition and about this project. We'll be happy to know and answer if possible.
Talia, Maria, thank you so much for that. That was fascinating. I'm going to put in the chat box right now the link to the information about the exhibition and the program for the exhibition. So anyone who wants to can click on it. Anyone who's watching this on YouTube, just go to the National Gallery's website, nationalgallery.ie, type in Mazzolino into the search bar, and you'll come up with this, and you'll see what else is happening. I know you both will be speaking again with my colleague Caoimhín as part of an upcoming talk and tea. We also have a really special talk where we're linking in with Trinity College, and they're bringing over a speaker from the UK. His name is Professor David Exsurgent, and he's one of the leading authorities on Renaissance art in Northern Italy at this time. He's going to be speaking in the gallery on the 27th of March at 6:30 p.m. The tickets for that are free because of the link with Trinity and because they're the ones organising it. So that would be really well worth people going to. I have to say that was absolutely fascinating. And for an ordinary non-scientific person like me to get an insight into your processes has been really, really interesting, especially, Natalia, to see the equipment that you use. I mean, it really is very high tech. and we're very fortunate to have a lab in the gallery. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. Special thanks to Michael for your interpretation, where there was a lot of complex, terms. So thank you so much, Michael, for that. We did have a question earlier from Patrina, who was asking when the painting was last on display. I know that's a slightly tricky question, actually.
Well, I can chime in here, Joanne.
Great.
Unfortunately, we're missing Aoife, who is the kind of the curatorial link to our to this painting, but I actually don't have an exact year here, but I know that I'm here at the gallery since 2010, and we haven't had it on display since then. And I think the previous documentation we have is related to a temporary exhibition that was on in the gallery in the 60s, and it hadn't been catalogued on display since then. So I can't give you an exact date, though.
It's funny, we're very good now at keeping records like that, and obviously have really good computer systems, but back then it was a little bit more difficult. Derval is asking a great question. How many paintings can you work on at once in the lab, and what is the next big project?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
So from a physical perspective, the lab is not huge, so there are only so many paintings we can fit in. So let's say that's really a great question, because it's really about prioritizing a certain level of streamlining of the analysis. At the moment, we're working on a big Jack B. Yeats project, because we really want to know more about this amazing, incredible Irish artist that is very important for us. So we'll keep you posted about that. And we generally try to bring one painting at a time for analysis. For the non-invasive bit, we can run analysis inside the lab. And for the rest of it, when we take a small sample, we can fit a lot of small samples because they're very tiny. So I'd say probably the highest number, Marie, I think you remember about that. It's been like three paintings at the same time, maybe. And then we had the Caravaggio once, but that would fill the whole room. So
yeah, I think
really,
at least three, I think. But we also, it's worth mentioning, like Natalia would spend quite a bit of time in the conservation studio, because she has a bit of portable equipment that we use sort of within the studio as well. So the sky is the limit, really.
Yeah, maybe it's worth mentioning that the lab is inside conservation, so we're very close. We just need to open a door, and so that's really handy, because it's really easy to move things around and just move that to the lab if it's needed.
That's fantastic. So interesting for anyone to hear about this, because it's not something that the public get to see. Michael is asking, is the microclimate encasing used in this conservation used on many other paintings in the gallery? And is it used only for wood panels, or is it used for canvas paintings too?
Yeah, thanks for that, Michael. We often would use it for paintings that are traveling on loan, especially if we have some concerns about, potential changes in humidity while the transit is ongoing. So it's really useful for that, and that's more of a short-term solution for a temporary loan. Whereas in this case, we're looking at it as a longer-term solution. So, within the gallery, we have some paintings that have been fitted for those microclimates, and they are sealed then when and if they are going on the road, but not normally within the gallery. It's something that we do in collaboration with the curators as well, because of course it requires the painting to be glazed. So it's something that needs to be done in discussion with them, because obviously it does affect the appearance of the painting. So it's a kind of a case
even though, of course, we have non-reflective glass, it still can affect it a little.
Yeah, and I would say sometimes it makes the painting look better. I don't know, controversial.
Yeah, absolutely. Some of you may have thought, listening to this talk, Ferrara, the d'Este, why is this ringing a bell? And if any of you have read Maggie O'Farrell's The Marriage Portrait, the book about Lucrezia de Medici, who's marrying Alfonso d'Este, that takes place in the 1550s. The painting we're discussing today is 1521, but similar time, and all happening in the same place. So the landscapes that are described are the kind of ones that we are seeing in the artworks as well. So some of you may have read it. I highly recommend it if anyone hasn't. It's fabulous. Maggie O'Farrell, The Marriage Portrait. But I think we have everything there. We don't have any more questions. As I said, search Mazzolino on the website and you'll see all of the other events that we have. There's even a Drawing the Collection event coming up as well. We're really excited to have it. It's such a lovely opportunity to show a fascinating project. You've even got some of the pigments in the exhibition as well, so people can see what they look like, and the original stones or sources for those are in there too. So that is wonderful. Thank you both, and to Aoife, who's not here today, for your presentations, for your work on this show, for your ongoing work in conservation in the lab. It's truly greatly appreciated. Thank you so much to Michael as well for your interpretation today. And as I say, this video will be on our YouTube page. The exhibition is on for free in the gallery until the 6th of July. Thank you all and have a lovely afternoon.
Thanks so much. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.